Hello, and welcome to Cutting Through, where we present analysis of foreign policy and domestic politics that cuts through the noise of corporate and ideologically driven media. I'm Mitchell Plitnick, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. You can subscribe to Cutting Through at mitchellplitnick.substack.com, where you can also become a paid subscriber or donate to support this work. And you can share Cutting Through with your friends and contacts, and that's just as useful. Today, I want to talk about a real danger, and one that is oddly a strange combination of people threatening other people and people actually contributing to their own demise. What I'm referring to is the Trump administration's continuing a trend that strongly took hold during the Joe Biden administration, and that is the illegitimate, deceptive, and very dangerous weaponization of anti-Semitism as a means of driving us toward, frankly, authoritarianism. We've seen the latest example of Trump using this just a couple of days ago when a Columbia University graduate who still lived in university housing with his wife, by the name of Mahmoud Khalil, was arrested by agents of ICE, who took him away despite the fact that Mahmoud is a green card holder, a legal permanent resident of the United States. Green card conveys most of the same rights as a citizenship. And certainly, it means that in no way is he in any way an illegal immigrant, an undocumented immigrant, anything that you could actually use as even a civil violation, let alone a criminal one. So what is Mahmoud accused of? Well, Mahmoud is frankly accused of the heinous crime of defending Palestinians' right to live. He is accused of objecting to a genocide that was perpetrated by Israel, and fully funded, fully armed, and fully protected, even to the extent of breaking American law, by the United States. When Mahmoud objected to that, apparently he got on someone's bad side. He was a leader of the campus encampment protests at Columbia. And this is Donald Trump fulfilling a campaign promise where he said he would deport anyone who he could deport that was involved in these protests. Now, he actually can't legally deport Mahmoud because, as I said, he is a legal permanent resident. But I think this is Trump testing the boundaries of what he can get away with and what people will stand for. And so far, it's been pretty shameful to see that only there have been certainly some objections raised even by liberals, but for the most part, it's been Mahmoud's colleagues in the Palestine Solidarity Movement, and others who would be considered progressive or left who are speaking out against this, when this should be a matter of concern to every single American, regardless of their political beliefs and persuasion. This isn't just singling out Mahmoud. And it should be noted that ICE basically ambushed him on campus, which implies, at least raises the question, doesn't make it certain, but it does raise the question of what the university's role was in this. But he was arrested outside of his housing unit with his wife, who is an American citizen and is 8 months pregnant. So you can imagine how she's feeling right now. Or, well, frankly, I can't even imagine something that awful. Mahmoud was also transferred out of New York all the way to Louisiana, thwarting his legal team's efforts to get him out of custody with a writ of habeas corpus. Now they have to first get him back to New York before they can even present this and go through that whole process. So there's definitely something going on here where He is being targeted, and let us be clear: there is no record whatsoever, including during the protests, of Mahmoud engaging in any illegal activity. To be sure, there was some vandalism. There were things that happened that were, we can talk about what's legitimate protest and what isn't, but the law is the law. And, if you break the law as part of your protest, sometimes there's good reason to do that. But you should do that, as Representative Al Green the other day, when he was talking about having been removed from Trump's speech because he would not sit down and shut up. He said, you do these things and you accept that you don't have to like the consequences, but you accept that they're coming. Mahmoud did nothing of the kind. What Mahmoud is being held in custody for is for exercising his right to free speech. That is it. Nothing else. He has been charged with no crimes. None. This is part of a large-scale attack on those who defend Palestinian rights. It is a classic example of how American law, American society, American politics have been twisted to defend indefensible and unimaginably criminal acts by Israel that Israel undertakes with our not just complicity, but our full partnership. Israel could not do these things without the United States. So it isn't just a matter of being complicit in them. We are just as responsible for everything Israel has done in Gaza, everything it is continuing to do in the West Bank, everything it is continuing to do in Syria and in Lebanon, as Israel is. We are full partners to every single one of those crimes. It should be clear, I think, that this is also a severe attack on the First Amendment. I think we can all see that. I mean, this is going, I think, beyond anything we saw certainly in the 60s in response to the anti-war protests against the Vietnam War, certainly anything from the beginning of this century against the Iraq War, which was, I would say, far less determined, maybe. There's something of a comparison to the Red Scare era of the 1950s and McCarthyism, but even there, I mean, we haven't gotten to the point of someone like Ethel Rosenberg being executed yet, and the fact that I'm using a Jewish woman there as an example is important, and we'll get back to that. But this is, Michelle Goldberg wrote today in the New York Times that this is the greatest threat to the First Amendment, certainly since the Red Scare. It may be even longer than that. This is and I would argue that it's more than just an attack on freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. It goes beyond that. Anti-Semitism and the false charges of it, the conflation of anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism or just criticism of Israel, not even anti-Zionism, because let us remember, there are many Zionists who criticize Israel from many different directions. But I'm talking right now from groups like Peace Now, the various rabbis for human rights, various groups in Israel, not to mention human rights groups like B'Tselem and other groups. There are plenty of those groups that are very critical of Israel and of its policies. And some of those people do not consider themselves Zionists. In fact, in some of those organizations, you have people from the Palestinian community in Israel that are make up a good deal of that workforce. But there are also many Jews, and I can tell you because I worked for B'Tselem for a number of years. There are many Jews who work there who do consider themselves Zionists. And yet they are very sharply critical of Israel's practices. So this is a broad attack against anyone who criticizes Israel, Zionist or anti-Zionist, and anywhere in between. But it's more than that. And I think we need to really have a much more serious conversation. We're arguing about the conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. We're arguing about, is this anti-Semitic? Is that anti-Semitic? We're having some of these arguments that are going back and forth and actually leading us nowhere. and we're ignoring what's really happening here. Anti-Semitism is being used in a variety of ways by the Trump administration, and it was used also in these ways by the Biden administration. All of these ways should be familiar to American Jews. They're all being ignored by American Jews, but they are all very dangerous to not only American Jews, although certainly to us, but to Americans and the world as a whole. Anti-Semitism has taken a variety of forms over the years, and in various different places, and it's served for various different rulers and kings and whoever, local lords, national, if you want to use that word, doesn't really apply much before the modern era, but kings and of the people, it's been used in a variety of ways to maintain power. Sometimes the way it's used is by letting loose public anger on Jews. Sometimes the way it's used is by apparently protecting Jews, privileging them until such time as it is useful to turn that the popular anger away from the crown and towards the Jews. These are things that have recurred, particularly in Europe, over the centuries, and we've seen it, and it happens, and then Jews tend to flee those places and go somewhere else. I mean, one of the difficulties in the Holocaust, one of the reasons it's so particularly traumatic, aside from its monstrous scale, is the fact that Jews had nowhere to run to. That doors were locked in our faces, very much including, let's not forget, by the United States, that had no reason to do it other than the fact that they didn't want a bunch of Jews coming into the country. But I digress. American Jews should recognize what's happening, and they don't. And there's a reason that they don't. There was a debate, I think, in the American Jewish community up until a year and a half ago about the legitimacy of anti-Semitism. Does anti-Semitism, what does it mean when you talk about anti-Semitism on the left, and what does it mean when you talk about anti-Semitism on the right? And all of these. There was a fairly lively debate. I think in many ways it was disingenuous, but it was a debate. It was a discussion. Now there is more of an overwhelming feeling, particularly among liberal Jews, that talks about the so-called anti-Semitism on the left, and specifically the anti-Semitism in the pro-Palestinian movement. Now, let's start with the whole right-left thing. First of all, supporters of Palestine come from across the political spectrum, as do, by the way, Palestinians. There are many Palestinians. Go to Palestine, talk to Palestinians. I know that's a crazy thought to so many Americans, but if you go to Palestine and you talk to Palestinian people, you find that, like everywhere else, there are liberals, there are leftists, there are conservatives, there are religious conservatives, there are secular conservatives, all sorts of different people with different political and ideological views, like everywhere else. The pro-Palestine movement also includes a variety of political ideologies and people who come from various political places. There are, certainly the American Arab community has a strong conservative element in it, and yet, many of those conservatives still support Palestinian rights. We can talk about where that comes from, why it is, but so the left right thing, my point basically is a bit of a misnomer. But in the Jewish community, we talked about Zionist Jews, anti-Zionist Jews. There's a wide variety of opinion here too, and it's far from the uniform. People like to say, well, 95% or 90% of Jews are Zionists. A hell of a lot of Jews have never even thought about that question. Many others have no connection whatsoever to Israel. These are bogus statistics that are derived from vaguely worded poll questions. But there's no question that I would certainly venture to say that a majority of American Jews are in some way pro-Israel, in some way adhere to the ideologies of Zionism, support the idea of a Jewish state. Um, and that's a debate that can be had. Um, but all of that changed on October 7th. American Jews were profoundly frightened by that event on many, many levels. Um, those who are a little bit older, maybe from my generation, or a little younger, um, certainly understood the comparison for Israelis to 9/11. It was a massive attack. It was the biggest attack on Israeli civilians in most people's memories. It was um, it was a massive war crime where many, many things were done that were really terrible. Sadly, the Israeli government and the Biden administration, both for some reason that I myself will never fully be able to wrap my mind around, except for the utmost cynicism, both of those parties decided to lie and make up things that never did happen, or that evidence for their happening is scant. But certainly, once you raise the accusation, and it comes from both the government of Israel and the president of the United States, people are apt to believe it. We can, beheaded babies and just horrible, horrible stories of things that did not happen, and what did happen was horrible enough. Um, you can see the videos. Hamas and others posted videos of things that happened on October 7th of civilians being gunned down. You can see videos of people in hiding in bomb shelters and uh, uh, militants throwing grenades in to just kill them all. And if any of them came running out, they shot them down. Terrible things happened. You didn't need to lie, but the lies certainly did heighten the fear factor. And that fear factor has been used and manipulated ever since. It is so you have an American Jewish community that feels like it is vulnerable to attack by Hamas or by Islamic Jihad or by Hezbollah or by whoever. That is how they feel. It's visceral. For You can talk to them and tell people that it's illogical, and they may even see that it's illogical. It doesn't matter. It's how they feel. It's a visceral feeling. They can't get away from it. And this, despite the fact that when you look back and see what's actually happened in recent years in the United States, Jews have not been attacked on the whole by Hamas or by Arab Americans or Arab tourists or visitors or whatever. They've been attacked by the far right. We look at the Tree of Life synagogue massacre. That was a far right white guy who did that. Many of the deadly and violent attacks, that's where they're coming from. To be sure, there's real anger out there at Israel's actions, and some of that is translated in towards the Jewish community. Now, I wrote about a year ago, I think, a piece explaining how I felt when I'm driving around and I see a shul with a synagogue with a big giant Israeli flag on it and an enormous sign that says "We stand with Israel." And I think, not only do I find that appalling during a genocide when Israel is committing a genocide, but I can only imagine how a Palestinian feels, especially a Palestinian. Many Palestinian Americans who've lost their entire families, or certainly a good portion of them in Gaza. How do they feel when they see that? What does that stir up in them? What does it say to them? This isn't an Israeli embassy. It's not an Israeli Defense Forces recruiting office. It's shul, or it's a Jewish community center. Um, Things which should not, by definition, be representing Israel in any way. It may have many people among them who support everything that Israel's doing. They may have people among them who do not supported some kind of response, but nothing like this, or have various nuanced views. And they may have people who oppose all of the violence and who see that the root cause of everything that's happening there, which is the truth, is not just the occupation, but the fundamental denial of Palestinian rights that has been the status quo since 1948, and one could argue even before that. So these fears and that reflects a dehumanization of Palestinians that drives a lot of policy, but also that only enhances the fear of many of these American Jews who are made afraid by by October 7th. And this just makes them even more scared. And that fear is then used to support not just our policies that are, not just our partnership in the genocide in Gaza and in the West Bank, but also in authoritarianism here. Those fears are used to justify and legitimize, because you can see it. The acts like throwing a legal permanent resident of the United States into jail for exercising his First Amendment rights. You would think Jews would know better, even if for no other reason, just out of self-interest. But sadly, we do not. And part of the reason that that is the case is that this manipulation of fear, not only being done first by Joe Biden and then by Donald Trump, but it's being done with the full cooperation of many of the largest Jewish organizations in this country. And they span a political spectrum from the Anti-Defamation League, which is at this point just notorious for it and is really at the root of the problem in many ways. And I'll get to that in a moment. To the American Jewish Committee, to AIPAC, to the Zionist Organization of America, from liberal to moderate to right wing, these Jewish organizations are all reinforcing this. And what they're doing is sending out this message about who Jews have to fear. And they're telling you, fear the Palestinian American, fear the Columbia University student wearing a keffiyeh, fear the person, the Jewish person who's out there saying, not in my name. That's who you fear. That's who is out to get you. It's not, heaven forbid, the white guy in the Oval Office. It's not the people on his staff who have spread anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, including one of the Pentagon's lead spokespeople right now. It's not Secretary of Defense who embraces white Christian nationalism. It's not the ambassador to Israel who wants to bring on another Christian Zionist who wants to bring on the end times with a massive conflagration in the Holy Land. Not the ambassador yet, but I'd be surprised if he's not confirmed. The right wing is, this is not to say that, again, there is anti-Semitism everywhere, just as there is racism everywhere, misogyny everywhere, homophobia everywhere. No group is immune to that. Hell, no people are immune to it. Individually, most of us have privilege in some form or another. I obviously, as a white male, presenting as straight, I'm bisexual, but I present as straight, cisgendered, there are privileges that go with that. I don't have, for example, class privilege. I'm working class, but I have other privileges. Most people do. There are some people who are literally in every one of those ways disempowered. We have various degrees of privilege. And they all blind us, and they all sometimes lead some of us into, groupthink and generalizations and unfair characterizations based on innate traits. We're human. We do that. That's fine. We all struggle with it. We all work against it. well, most of us try to work against it anyway. We like to, try to strive to be fair to everyone, um, but we can't all do that. Okay, but when we talk about white supremacy, when we talk about white nationalism, when we talk about misogyny, when we talk about anti-Semitism, these are things that, yes, a progressive may struggle with. Um, a progressive may have to work very hard. I can certainly say I've tried my best to work hard to overcome these things. We're successful, we're unsuccessful, but on the right, this is fundamental to what the right wing is. Okay, and we're seeing it play out. This is exactly why DEI comes under attack. This is exactly why anybody who is in a position of power, um, for example, a fire chief in Los Angeles, is accused, if they're not a white male, they're accused of getting their job because of some affirmative action thing, or because of their gender, because of their sexual orientation, because of their race, whatever it may be. Usually not the case. Usually, if you rise that high as a woman, as a person of color, etc., um, you had to work twice as hard to do it. But okay, this is the reality of the right wing. This is what uh, the MAGA movement, the Trumpians, whatever you want to call these groups, this is what they stand for, and this is why they're going out and making up ridiculous definitions of things like critical race theory that have no relationship whatsoever to what critical race theory actually is. Why they say, well, DEI is this, that, and the other, and we just simply, have to get rid of it and pretend that we're all colorblind. And yet somehow, surprisingly, you look at then all the people who are in power, they're all white men, almost, pretty close anyway. That is that is the fundamental difference. Um, and what has happened is that we have lost sight of the realities of anti-Semitism. Why have we lost sight? Well, I think if we wanted to point to one really huge factor, we can look at statistics around anti-Semitism, both before October 7th and after October 7th, wherever you want to draw the line. But almost everyone who comes up with statistics about anti-Semitic incidents draws either directly or indirectly from the Anti-Defamation League. And the Anti-Defamation League made a conscious and unambiguous and quite open decision to say that that criticism of Israel, that goes beyond sort of polite conversation. So criticism of Israel that says, well, Israel's an apartheid state, which it obviously is. Criticism of Israel that says boycott, which is a legitimate form of protest, whether you agree with the political goal or not. That these are examples of anti-Semitism, and certainly anti-Zionism. Then, in their mind, is anti-Semitism. Once you fudge the statistics like that, they're completely unreliable. We have no way anymore of knowing what the true level of anti-Semitism is. We can sense that, we can see that it's gone up. We can all see it. But anytime we see some sort of anti-Semitic, whether it's just something relatively, it's not that it's okay, but relatively minor, like graffiti, or somebody shouting some nasty words, things of that nature, people now is just assume that it's a pro-Palestinian rooted act, and this isn't, there's no reason to make that assumption. It's unlikely to be true. On the flip side, when we look at violent attacks, now, again, those are assumed to be based on Look at the recent incident in Florida. You had a Jewish man, Jewish American, see two Israelis who he thought were Arabs, and he shot at them. And they, the two Israelis, thought that the person shooting at them was a Palestinian or Palestinian supporter. And they were all Jewish. It was the only difference is one was American and the other two were Israeli, but everyone was Jewish. And yet everyone was also blaming Palestinians who were not involved at all, had nothing to do with it. When we look at people who have been assaulted, we can look at the college student, the Palestinian American college student, who was paralyzed because he had the temerity to be walking down the street wearing a keffiyeh as he was on his way to his grandmother's house. We have a 6-year-old boy who will never turn 7 because he was Palestinian. Thankfully, these things aren't happening to Jews, but you wouldn't know it from the response, from the way the Jewish community is reacting, as if Jews are just under siege, as if Kristallnacht is going to break out any night. It just isn't true. It just isn't the case. Jews are not that endangered right now, and the dangers that we do face didn't rise up after October 7th. They rose up when Donald Trump was elected president, and we saw that happen. We watched it happening when he was president. And that's why we shunned him. That's why the people at the Tree of Life Synagogue and their memorials told him not to come. They didn't want him there. They knew whose fault it was. We know whose fault it was. It had nothing to do with Palestine. So what's the point of all this? What is the point of this channeling of fear of anti-Semitism into this protection of Israel? Well, the point is, of course, for the ADL, for the AJC, for AIPAC, the point is protecting Israel. The point is that Israel never faces consequences and can do whatever it wants, whether it's in response to something like October 7th or whether it's simply continuing the long history of displacing and dispossessing and denying Palestinians their rights. That's what they're doing. And they, I think somewhere, somebody like Jonathan Greenblatt understands that what he's doing is downplaying the real anti-Semitism in order to protect Israel, which he thinks is more important to do than actually fight anti-Semitism. But that's not why Donald Trump is doing it. Donald Trump isn't doing this for Israel. Donald Trump is doing this to advance authoritarianism. And that is the point of all that I've been talking about here. This is this abuse of the issue of anti-Semitism is the tip of an authoritarian spear that is aiming at all Americans, not just Jews. It is being used to advance authoritarian. When you can even threaten to deport a permanent legal resident who has never committed a crime, and you're doing it because of his political views and his expression of those political views, that is authoritarianism, and it's only that's case number one of thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands over the years. That will happen in various degrees. But most people recognize by now, and it's only been not even 2 months yet, most people recognize by now that Donald Trump is putting Project 2025 into play. He's doing that. What's less well known and what's less clear is that the very same people, the Heritage Foundation, that came up with Project 2025, so the same institution that produced Project 25 produced another project that's also in full gear, and that's called Project Esther. And Project Esther is meant to label all support for Palestinian rights, all criticism of Israel, as support for Hamas. That is the basic goal. And to use bogus charges of anti-Semitism to do it. That's Project Esther. Look it up. Okay, you can find it. I wrote an article about it. There is stuff out there. It's just not talked about very much. But those two projects, both coming from the Heritage Foundation, work hand in glove. The people who wrote Project Esther, for the most part, aren't Jewish. And their framing even of the goals and steps of Project Esther are the framing is not just to protect Jews, not even just to protect Israel. They're framing the entire Palestinian rights movement as anti-American, as fundamentally anti-American, as against all American values, well beyond any conflicts in Palestine or the greater Middle East. They're painting it as a global conspiracy. This is pure authoritarianism, and in framing it that way, they get to dodge the problem of the fact that so many of the people who speak out for Palestinian rights are Jewish, here and in Europe. When it becomes clear to people that this bullshit fight against anti-Semitism, this phony fight, has been a way to thrust authoritarianism in the guise of fighting for people who are facing a threat into the very heart of American society, you think they're going to blame themselves for being stupid? Do you think they're going to blame Donald Trump with all his power? What can they, the power of the American government? Or are they going to blame the Jews? Because that is who they're going to blame. It's always been the case. So if you can't care about what this means for our policy, how this entrenches dehumanization of Palestinians, how this cements the complete abrogation of Palestinian rights and the attacks on Palestinians and on their supporters here in the United States. If you can't care about any of that, but you claim to care about Jews, then you should be standing up against all of this, all of it. The fact that Joe Biden and his Secretary of State, the thug Antony Blinken, repeatedly broke American law in order to maintain their support of Israel's genocide. The fact that Donald Trump is talking about emptying Gaza of Palestinians, which has, whether or not that succeeds, it has encouraged Israel to accelerate its practices on the West Bank. It has already emptied out 3 refugee camps in the West Bank. And it's continuing to displace thousands more Palestinians all the time, and is ramping up those crimes as we speak. And Trump is enabling all of that. These are all together. You cannot separate our crimes in Israel and Palestine from our crimes here at home. It all has to be opposed. You can't separate Project 2025 from Project Esther, because they're fruits of the same tree. And so we need to stand against those. We need to stand against this misuse of anti-Semitism. If you can't do it for the good of the world, if you can't even do it for the good of the United States, and you only care about what's good for the Jews, then do it for that reason, because it's going to kill us. Okay? Jewish Americans, so-called liberals, so-called moderates, who are standing with this, or at least standing silent as it's going on, are digging all of our graves. And it needs to stop. So thanks for listening to this, and I hope you'll take heed of it, especially if you're in a position to really, help those of us who are trying to stand up against what's going on. And if you can, like this video, subscribe, share it with your friends and colleagues, and if you can support this work by going to mitchellplitnick.substack.com. All of the articles there have links to donate through Cash App to help support this. they all have links to become a paid supporter or a free supporter of free subscriber to the Cutting Through newsletter. Any of that and all of that helps. So and I think uh, um, this outlet and many others that are like it are trying to be the vanguard in a world that is increasingly difficult to get good analysis, good information out. So please support that work. Thanks very much.